Over the weekend, and as of 7 a.m. this morning, approximately 4,700 people were placed under an evacuation order due to the Parker Lake wildfire in the Northern Rockies Regional Municipality. This includes the town of Fort Nelson and the Fort Nelson First Nation. I have also been informed that additional alerts affecting approximately an additional 80 properties related to the Holdover and Parker Lake wildfires have just been upgraded to evacuation orders as well. This is an extremely difficult time for the people that have been impacted. Our thoughts are with you, and the province is there to support you. The Parker Lake wildfire, which started on May 10th, is now over 5,280 hectares and located 2.5 kilometers west of the town of Fort Nelson. The next 48 hours will be a challenging situation for the Northern Rockies Regional Municipality, given forecasted ongoing westerly winds and extremely dry and volatile fuels in the area. We may begin to see volatile wildfire activity later this afternoon. BC Wildfire Service wildfire crews and local fire crews and fire departments from across the province are doing everything they can do to protect homes and the community. BC Wildfire Service is responding to wildfires near Fort Nelson, including the Holdover Patry Creek wildfire 20 kilometers north of Fort Nelson, with an incident management team, 70 BC Wildfire Service wildland wildfire fighters, 19 rotary wing aircraft and air tankers, 17 pieces of heavy equipment, and 70 structural protection personnel and equipment. A second incident management team has been deployed to help with wildfires in the Prince George Fire Center. Highway 97 and Highway 77 remain closed north of Fort Nelson. As always, drivers are advised to refer to drivebc.ca for current conditions. My deepest thanks go to our firefighters, our BC Wildfire Service firefighters, and our local firefighters who are working around the clock, battling the fires and working to keep the community safe. To those who have evacuated, I know that this is an extremely difficult time, and I want you to know that supports are available if you need them, including accommodation, food, and incidentals. Reception centers are open in Fort St. John, Dawson Creek, Chetwynd, and Prince George. At this time, we are not aware of any people who have been evacuated who do not have the accommodation that they need. However, rooms remain available for those who do need it. Over the weekend, the province has established additional accommodation site with 200 rooms at Sunset Prairie. Provincial staff are also on the ground helping to register people for emergency supports as quickly as possible. While reception centers are working through queues to answer any questions evacuees might have, Service BC will be opening a call center today to also help answer questions from evacuees. They will also be proactively reaching out to evacuees to check in and offer any additional supports. In light of the elevated risk in and near Fort Nelson, I am asking those who have not yet evacuated to please do so. We are here to provide any emergency supports you may need, including accommodation, food, and incidentals. Mental health supports are also being provided. Disaster psychosocial services have been deployed to Fort St. John through Health Emergency Management BC. Anyone can call the BC Mental Health Line for free around the clock at 310-6789. There is no area code. To help with anxiety, depression, emotional support, and resources specific to mental health and substance use disorders. And again, that number is 310-6789. I want to thank everyone on the ground, search and rescue, and the RCMP for helping to evacuate people, emergency support services volunteers, emergency management staff, and the communities of Fort St. John, Dawson Creek, Chetwynd, and Prince George for standing up as host communities. This is a dynamic situation for all of the people living in the Northeast. You are not alone. We are in this together, and we will continue to get through this together. Thank you. And we will now have time for questions. Joining us today include Cliff Chapman, Director of Wildfire Operations with the BC Wildfire Service, Andrew Morrison, Acting Director, Regional Operations for Emergency Management and Climate Readiness, Daryl Gunn, Executive Director, Northern Region with the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, as well as Jeremy Oaten, Deputy Director of Emergency Management with Ministry of Agriculture and Food.
A reminder to media on the line, please press *1 to enter the queue. Please do direct your questions to the appropriate people if you're aware of who that might be. We are going to start with questions in the room. We are going to start with Richard Zussman, Global News. Please go ahead.
Minister, maybe one of the experts on the line, but start with you. What do we know about the conditions of these westerly winds? Like, how much has this changed in the forecast, and what has you concerned about the next 48 hours?
We are facing some extremely challenging we are facing some extremely challenging conditions up in the north. We know that drought conditions have persisted through since 2023. This has made the fuels in the area extremely dry. With no precipitation, no major precipitation in the forecast ahead, and winds that can pick up at any time, let's just say we are extremely concerned. I will refer to Cliff Chapman to provide you with a better answer than what I just provide, a more articulate answer.
Thank you, Minister Mon. Thank you for the question, Richard. So last night we were expecting to see those westerly winds kind of pick up later into the evening and last throughout the night, which is why we released a video late yesterday afternoon, sort of indicating that was going to happen. Fortunately, we didn't see those winds materialize last night, but we do expect them to return later this morning, sort of early into the afternoon. Now, unlike Friday with the cold front, we're not expecting to see 70-kilometer winds, but we are expecting sort of 25 to 30 sustained winds coming from the west, which obviously with the location of the Parker Lake wildfire is a big concern for our operational staff on the ground, who remain in place, doing structure protection, continuing to build guards, and continuing to use air support to try to protect the community of Fort Nelson. But those winds are going to be here for the next 48 hours. And it's really just about when they show up and how long they're going to last. But we are anticipating them later this morning and then to continue for the next, 1 to 2 days.
The additional incident management team that was brought in, explain the process of that. Why was an additional team brought in, and what sort of work will that team be doing?
Over to you, Cliff.
Yeah, thank you for that. So just quickly, incident management teams are our most highly trained individuals across a broad spectrum of an incident command system. So we have an incident commander, an operations chief, a logistics chief, a plans chief, and then it goes on from there. And we're happy to follow up on exactly what an incident management team is comprised of. We already had pre-located one to Fort Nelson, actually ahead of the Parker Lake wildfire, because of the holdover fires to the north and to the east of the community of Fort Nelson, which we anticipated to see some growth over the weekend with the cold front. The additional incident management team really is in reflection of, or in response to, the Parker Lake fire. We know the incident management team in Fort Nelson is going to be very occupied with the Fort Nelson or the Parker Lake wildfire, but we still have a lot of fire in the northern part of Prince George. And so this second incident management team will both support the Parker Lake incident management team, but also will be able to assist in the other fires that are predominantly our holdover fires in the Prince George Fire Center, to ensure that those fires also get the appropriate response resources and we see operational tactics on the ground. So supporting the current IMT, but also supporting more broadly the Prince George Fire Center and the other fires in that area.
Our next question comes from Chad Pawson, CBC.
Thanks, Minister. Update involves these holdover fires, I think by rough count from the BC wildfire map, like 4 on Friday, 9 today. Did the province do enough over the winter to deal with these holdover fires to try and prevent them from what's happening with them now?
Yeah, I think that it's important to note that holdover fires often burn very deep underground. In the past, the winter conditions are what put out a lot of holdover fires. In this case, what we've seen is that due to higher temperatures and persistent drought through from last year, many of these holdover fires were not put out the way that they normally are. Cliff, I know that you'll likely have more to add on that.
Yeah, I think this is a really good question, and it's certainly something that, as an agency, we have dealt with holdover fires for my entire career, over 21 years. This is not a new situation for British Columbia. Obviously, the impacts of how much landscape was on fire last year amplified this challenge for the BC Wildfire Service, but more importantly for the citizens of northern BC in particular. It is important to note that just because the fires were underground, there was still snow on top of these fires. They were not producing heat signatures for a big portion of the winter. And so when we talk about 2.8 million hectares of fire, we had very limited heat signatures until it started to become snow-free, and we were using our predictive services unit. We had a recovery table in the northeast of the province, which comprised of the local government, the First Nation government, the provincial government, really trying to understand what recovery would look like, but also planning for what response would look like as these holdover fires started to show heat again. So we did anticipate the holdover fires. We planned for the holdover fires. That was a big reason why we sent an incident management team up to Fort Nelson ahead of this Parker Lake fire, knowing that this cold front would likely expose where these holdover fires were still carrying heat. And that's exactly what happened. So I am proud of the BC Wildfire Service team and everyone in the Northeast for coming together to do everything we could to plan for these fires. But obviously, they have come out of their existing boxes from last year, and we continue to respond as we can.
So the follow-up, Cliff, then is, it sounds like quite a bit of work was done around holdover fires, but what more could be done in years ahead as this is going to continue to be a problem?
Yeah, I appreciate the follow-up. I think we're not the only agency that's dealing with holdover fires. Alberta and Manitoba are also dealing with this right now as they experience hot and dry conditions and windy conditions. I think for us, it's continuing to work with all of the land-based users, with the governments to understand where these fires were from the previous year and how we anticipate to deal with them. I think that this year was really about planning. And given what's happening in Fort Nelson right now, I think, this is probably a question that we could follow up on afterwards. And the answer to a lot of these questions is really in prevention, right? It's really in Fire Smart. It's really in using the BC Wildfire Service initiatives, but the ministry initiatives, trying to create a more resilient land base, which is a much broader question. But I think for the interest of today's press conference, we'll focus in on Fort Nelson, but we can follow up with some more things that took place this winter, but also some things that I think we could learn and move forward on for future years.
Our next question comes from Dirk Meisner, Canadian Press.
Hi, Minister. You said people that are remaining behind right now should evacuate, but do you have any idea how many people have not yet evacuated from that area?
We are aware of a small number of people who have chosen over the weekend to not evacuate. However, that number is fluctuating. The vast majority of the community evacuated when asked to do so, did so in an orderly manner. We're extremely grateful for the people who did follow the evacuation order immediately. Over the weekend, local RCMP search and rescue volunteers, as well as staff from the Northern Rockies Regional Municipality, have been appealing to each of these individuals to leave as well. And I understand that people are making different choices in more recent times.
Follow up, Dirk?
So the people that are staying behind, are they staying to fight the fire, or are they refusing to leave, or what are some of the reasons why people would stay with a fire approaching? It
is an incredibly, incredibly difficult thing to leave your home when you are asked to evacuate due to wildfire, due to flood, due to any emergency reason. I completely understand how this kind of stressful situation would cause people to wonder whether or not they want to stay. I mean, this is your home, your life, your home may have. I mean, we're talking about people's entire lives in some of these homes. So I really want to emphasize that it is not easy to leave, but at the same time, we need people to be safe. We are facing some extraordinarily challenging circumstances up there in the north. The Emergency Operations Center as well as the Incident Command Center have both left the Fort Nelson area, although resources are still being deployed. And so we are appealing to anyone who has so far chosen to stay behind to leave now.
Next, we go to the phones. We'll hear first from Wolf Deppner, Black Press.
Yes, thank you for taking my question. Can you sort of estimate the probability of property damage to Fort Nelson?
I think that we need to realize that this is a very active situation right now, and the focus is on fighting the fire and on keeping evacuees safe and supporting evacuees during what is likely to be one of the most difficult times of their lives. I recognize that people will have questions about damage, either damage that has already occurred over the weekend or damage projections into the future. Now is not the time to talk about that. We have to recognize people are out of their homes. We have literally nearly 5,000 evacuees right now around the north seeking accommodations. We need to focus on fighting the fire together.
Follow-up, Wolf?
Yes, thank you. What, if any, additional resources might be coming from outside of BC to help deal with this fire, as well as any other fires that might be popping up in the area, as Cliff Chapman mentioned? Thank you.
Thank you. Cliff, over to you on the state of our resources right now.
Yeah, thank you, Wolf. We are mobilizing additional resources for the Prince George Fire Center. We have responded to all of the requests that have come from the Prince George Fire Center using our internal BC Wildfire Service resources. But additionally, we have had tremendous support from municipal fire departments and local governments in response to both the Parker Lake wildfire, but any other additional fires that we have in the Prince George fire scene. At this time, we do not require additional resources from outside the province of British Columbia, but I assure everyone that we have the ability to call in those resources when we need them, and we will be able to get them quickly.
Our next question comes from Max Bowder, Energetic City.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I'm sure you answered this question already, but it was reported on BCWS yesterday that there was a risk of the Parker Lake wildfire reaching Fort Nelson. Is there just any more updates you can provide on that or the Fort Nelson wildfire in general?
Go ahead, Cliff.
Yeah, thank you. So we didn't actually fully answer this, so thank you for the question. We did not see the winds through the evening last night. We were seeing actually very low winds through the evening with what we call an inversion, not allowing that wind to show up. So the fire still remains approximately 2.5 kilometers from the Fort Nelson proper. Obviously, there are rural residences kind of scattered along, like most communities in British Columbia. There are rural residences as well. So that it is still 2.5 kilometers from kind of Fort Nelson proper. We continue to respond to that fire on the ground in Indiana.
Follow-up, Max?
That's everything. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our next question on the phones comes from Gordon Hoekstra, Vancouver Sun.
Thank you for taking my question. This is probably for Cliff or any other experts there. Back in, I think it was late 2002, the province announced a wildfire mitigation project for the Fort Nelson Community Forest to create a fuel break. I'm just wondering if anyone knows what the progress on that has been and whether it's helping to reduce the risk to the community, and if there's been any other kind of work such as that to reduce the wildfire risk in and around the community.
Cliff, are you familiar with the project?
So thanks for the question. I'm not sure if I'm on, but so I can't speak specifically to that one, especially given that it was that long ago, as you suggest. We can certainly follow up on that specific project. But what I will say is there has been significant investments in the Community Resiliency Investment Program administered through the Union of BC Municipalities in partnership with First Nation Emergency Services Society and the provincial government. And communities can apply for grant funding to do risk reduction work in and around their communities, which I am certain that Fort Nelson has used that program, both the program you speak of roughly 20 years ago, but also the Community Resiliency Program that's been in place now for the last 4 years and continues to be a great opportunity for communities to get funding to try to become more fire smart and make the communities more resilient. We will follow up specifically with what's happened in and around Fort Nelson.
Follow up, Gordon?
It was 2022, so it's only a couple of years ago. But fair enough for the follow-up. Yeah, I do have a follow-up question. You mentioned that about the kind of ongoing work. I think the province estimated, several years ago that about 1.1 million hectares around, various communities in BC needed work to reduce wildfire risk. Has the province been tracking that at all? And can you provide an update about how much of that work has been done? Because I think several years ago it was only about 10% of that 1.1 million hectare number.
Yeah, happy to provide a response to this question as well. So again, like I spoke to the last question, the Communities Resiliency Investment Program. In addition, we have a wildfire resiliency program that's internal to the Ministry of Forest that we partner with local governments and communities to do work within the Crown land adjacent to communities. So it's really a partnership program, community grants to fund within jurisdiction, and then the wildfire resiliency program to fund the Crown land adjacent to do treatments together. To provide specific numbers, it would be an error in judgment for me to try to provide that today, but we will follow up with the numbers. And candidly, yes, the amount of high and extreme risk in this province continues to grow around communities, and communities continue to grow towards the what we call the wildland-urban interface into the forest. That's where a lot of people want to live in British Columbia. So that number continues to increase, and so we need to continue to see these investments both through the CRI program as well as the internal program to treat Crown land. We'll follow up with specifics on the numbers.
We head back up north now for our next question. Amanda Follett-Hosgood, the Tyee. Please go ahead.
For the BC wildfire folks, but also happy to hear from the minister. I'm just wondering, is this the earliest we've ever seen an evacuation order in BC? And if so, how far in advance of previous evacuation orders?
Yeah, the first evacuation order that was issued in BC actually occurred a few weeks ago. It is not unprecedented, although it is quite rare. I will say, however, that it is extremely uncommon for us to have so many people on an evacuation order at this time. I believe Andrew Morrison with EMCR is on the line. Andrew, if you have any additional historical data to share.
Thanks for the question, Minister. And I don't have anything at my fingertips, so we'll take the question and get back to the reporter if we can.
Follow
up, Amanda?
I did have one follow-up. I'm just wondering if folks outside the immediate area, say the Prince George area, local residents wanted to offer support, maybe offer a place for people to stay. Is that a possibility? And what's the process for doing that?
There are reception centers in Prince George, in Chetwynd, in Dawson Creek, in Fort St. John. Folks who have accommodation to offer may reach out to those reception centers and offer them. We do work with local governments and local authorities on establishing what accommodations are available in the area. And so I think that those reception centers, those host communities, would likely be happy to hear about opportunities to put evacuees up. That being said, we are currently not aware of any evacuees who do not have the accommodations they need, and additional accommodations are available for evacuees who may need them.
Our next question comes from Penny Daflos, CTV.
Hi there. I just want to get a sense from BC Wildfire Service that, this is a really remote area. And so given that we're seeing evacuations here, that this is, I know that you guys fight fires in remote areas fairly often, but can you give us a sense of the challenges right now in terms of running your operation, of being able to facilitate that many crews, people up there, what your challenges are in terms of logistics in such a remote area?
Go ahead, Cliff.
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's really excellent, and you're right. It's a long distance between Fort Nelson and other communities, including where our fire center is located, like our primary fire center, which is in Prince George. Saying that, we do have crews that are positioned and permanently in Fort Nelson, as well as Fort St. John and other communities up in the Northeast. But the logistical challenges are real, and it is part of why we put an incident management team out ahead of this, really the Parker Lake wildfire. We started to get them moving last Tuesday, knowing that this cold front was coming, knowing there was potential for fire. So we try to account for the distance by utilizing preparedness planning, but also by utilizing different means of travel. So we have the ability to fly people if it makes sense to do so, to try to limit the drive distance of our crews to get them there immediately. And again, it's also part of us expanding our partnerships, using municipal fire departments that are local to support structure protection and structure defense, because they can get their apparatus there obviously much faster than we can from a location like Kamloops or the Lower Mainland. So it's a partnership-based approach to ensure we have the resources there in time. And as these fires continue to grow, we'll continue to mobilize resources from across BC, as well as utilizing local infrastructure to support our response.
Follow up, Penny?
Yeah, given that, then, are you relying predominantly on aerial firefighting for this particular fire, or are there ground efforts as well? If you could just kind of break it down compared to a typical fire, if there is such a thing, and your reliance on aerial versus ground crews to be able to fight this thing.
Yeah, and so in terms of tactics, it's the same tactics we would deploy on any fire in British Columbia, whether it was rural and remote or adjacent to a large urban center. So yes, we're using aviation resources. We have 17 helicopters assigned in that area of multiple sizes to support from the air. We've had air tankers on that fire and continue to support with air tanker operations. And we also have heavy equipment that are putting in fire guard and crews that are reinforcing that fire guard. It's important to note that with the conditions and the dryness of the Northeast right now, we are seeing extreme fire behavior. And so ground operations are often compromised. And so our focus really is about trying to do structure protection, structure defense, and reinforce our guards on those fires using heavy equipment and air support. So it's a joint effort, air and ground. You really need it to be a joint effort on any fire that has this type of fire behavior. But it is no different than how we would fight a fire elsewhere in the province.
Next question comes from Alec Lazenby, BC Today.
Hi, I don't know if this question is for Minister Ma or BCWS, but I was wondering, there's been some complaint that the up-to-date wildfire map isn't being updated as frequently as maybe it should be with, for example, a fire near Dawson Creek being out, but still on the map saying it's been out of control. So what efforts are being taken to make sure that those maps are up to date for people living in those communities, worried about where the fires are at or what they can expect moving forward?
Cliff, are you able to speak to the maps and how information is pushed out to them?
Yeah. So, as we talked about, I believe about a week ago at our first press conference, we talked about how we had made significant changes to our app, the BC Wildfire Service app, and it is now completely tied in with the BC Wildfire Service webpage, and also works with other provincial government applications like Drive BC and EMCR. Saying that, obviously, when we have a situation like we had with Parker Lake, the information that gets put into the system might be slightly delayed as we respond to Parker Lake. So that may have happening, and we'll have to look into this specific question about, say, the fire in Dawson Creek, and understand why maybe it wasn't updated as quickly as it maybe needed to be. Because really our goal is to provide as close to real-time information as we can through our application, so that people in the public can trust that application and know when they go there, what is happening in and around the area in which they live. So we'll have to look into that.
Follow up, Alec?
Yes. So last year we heard issues about people in the Peace region or near the Alberta border fleeing to Alberta, evacuating to Alberta, and then not being able to get support through BC despite being BC residents. What changes have been made to address that? And will people who, for whatever reason, forced to or decide to evacuate to Alberta, what supports will they be able to get?
Yeah, so the Premier's Task Force on Emergencies, which was launched following the BC wildfire season of 2023, did produce several recommendations, including improving delivery of emergency support services during large-scale events. Now, we do have a digital tool, the ERA tool, the Evacuee Registration Assistance Tool. We are looking to expand its functionality in order to better support people during emergencies, and we're hoping to be able to provide more information about that shortly. In the meantime, we do keep in close communication with our emergency management partners in Alberta to be able to provide mutual aid whenever that is needed. And for this particular evacuation event, we are directing people to the reception centers in Fort St. John, Prince George, Chetwynd, and Dawson Creek if they require evacuee support.
Our last question today comes from Matt Simmons of the Narwhal. Go ahead, Matt.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I was hoping BC Wildfire Service could speak to sort of the on-the-ground specific measures that are being taken right now to protect Fort Nelson itself and Fort Nelson First Nation in terms of structural protection and fire breaks and things like that, knowing that as the day progresses, fire behavior is likely to change and get more aggressive.
Go ahead, Cliff.
Yeah, I'm happy to provide an update. I will also encourage everybody to go to the BC Wildfire Service app, and as you scroll through, we do actually now speak to what resources are on this fire as well as the operations for the day. Given the nature of this fire, I am happy to speak to it. So we have 69 BC Wildfire Service staff on site of this fire, including the incident management team, which we spoke of earlier. There are additional fire crews en route, as well as some single resources. We have 19 helicopters assigned. Fixed-wing air tankers are available as needed in the northeast of the province, but specifically for structure protection. So we have 4 structure protection specialists, 2 structure protection task force leaders, 64 structure protection personnel, which is made up predominantly of municipal fire departments of the northeast of the province. And again, I want to thank them for their continued support. Those apparatus and those individuals are deploying sprinklers, doing structure protection, defending the structures in Fort Nelson from the potential of fire entering the community. That is the priority of our team. It is the priority of the team that is operating on this fire right now. That also includes the use of heavy equipment on the ground, putting in fire guards to, again, try to slow the spread of that fire should it try to make a push towards Fort Nelson. So everything is focused on the protection of the community of Fort Nelson and Fort Nelson First Nation. That is where all of our resources are assigned, and the operations they are undertaking is all in the interest of structure protection and structure defense.
Follow up, Matt?
Yes, thank you. So noting that BC Wildfire is listing this as a human-caused fire, I just wondered if you wanted to sort of speak more broadly to the public in terms of being aware and being careful out there.
At this time, early on in the season, most of the fire starts that we see are human-caused. Later on in the summer, as the weather conditions evolve, we do end up seeing very few human-caused wildfire starts, and the majority of those fires will be started through natural causes. But right now, especially as we enter into the May long weekend, we really need people to pay attention to the fire bans that are in their region, if there are any. And even if there are no fire bans in place, folks who are going out into the wilderness to go camping, we need people to pay extra care, pay extra attention and take extra care to ensure that their campfires are put out at the end as well. The conditions are quite dry across the province. It is necessary for everybody who is enjoying the May long weekend throughout the province to also be mindful about the possibility of fire starts as well. Cliff, if you have anything else that you want to add.
Thanks, Minister Ma. I really think you covered it. You know, for us, I would just, the only thing I would add is that we want to have people that are enjoying beautiful British Columbia, and you also become our eyes and ears out in some of the remote areas of BC, and you're able to call in fires that may start. And so I was asked the question last week about campfire prohibitions. At this time, we're not implementing campfire prohibitions. And again, we want people to enjoy the long weekend, but do so responsibly. And if you see something, please call it in. Even if you think it's already been called in, please call it in so that we can continue to respond as quickly as we can. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, everyone. That concludes today's availability.